two tiny German Shepherd puppies tied to a tree in the scorching summer heat. A wheelchair-bound boy, fragile yet full of quiet strength, was the first to find them. But who would do such a cruel thing? And how could this simple act of kindness lead to a moment that would heal not just hearts, but generations? What happens at the end of this story might just bring tears to your eyes. Please let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from today? Now, let's begin. The sun was relentless that afternoon, pressing down on the small farming town of Millersfield, Ohio, with a suffocating weight. The cicadas buzzed in a constant shrill rhythm as heat shimmered above the asphalt. Walter Green wiped his brow with the back of his hand, streaking dust across his already sun-weathered skin. At 50, Walter bore the kind of strength that wasn't loud. It was quiet, enduring, like the steady rhythm of his garden hoe slicing through soil. Walter stood about 6 feet tall, with a broad chest, sun-darkened forearms, and calloused hands that knew the shape of every tool in his shed. His hair, once jet black, had surrendered to streaks of gray at the temples, and his beard was always trimmed just enough to look like he didn't try. He wasn't a man of many words, but the townsfolk trusted him, not for charm, but because he showed up when no one else did. A widower for nearly a decade, Walter had raised his daughter alone after his wife, Sarah, passed from ovarian cancer. Since then, he had lived simply, quietly, tending to gardens across the county and minding his own. That day, Walter had just finished a job trimming rose bushes for a retired teacher on the edge of town. He was driving home in his aging red Ford pickup, windows down, letting the warm air dry the sweat on his neck. The road wound through a sparsely wooded area where telephone poles cast lazy shadows across cracked pavement. That was when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the symphony of summer. At first, he thought it was a bird, but then came the second whimper, soft, high-pitched, and urgent. Walter slowed the truck, eyes scanning the roadside. Nothing. He stopped the engine. The sudden silence was disorienting. Then it came again, a muffled, desperate cry. He stepped out of the truck and followed the sound down the shallow embankment into a patch of tall grass and scattered wildflowers. That's when he saw them. Two puppies, barely 2 months old, tied to a tree with a frayed blue rope. Their fur was matted, clinging to their skinny bodies in clumps. The larger one had a scratch above his left eye, the wound crusted over with dirt. The smaller one trembled so hard that her entire body shook with each shallow breath. They were German shepherds, or at least mostly so, with large paws and black and tan coats dulled by grime. Walter crouched slowly, his movements deliberate. "Well now, what in God's name?" he murmured. The larger pup growled weakly, lips twitching over tiny white teeth, but it was more fear than threat. The smaller one collapsed onto her side, too weak to resist. "Easy," Walter said softly, pulling a pocket knife from his jeans and cutting the rope. He lifted the trembling bodies one by one, cradling them in his arms like fragile bundles of fur and bone. Back in the truck, he laid them gently on the passenger seat, lining it with his canvas jacket. As he drove, the smell hit him, urine, sweat, blood, and heat. It clung to the air like shame. He didn't know who could do something like this, and maybe it was better he didn't. All that mattered now was getting them safe. Walter lived in a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The white paint was peeling in places, but the porch swing still creaked reliably, and the garden out back was a riot of green. Inside, the air was cool thanks to an old ceiling fan that clicked as it turned. He carried the pups into the kitchen and laid them on an old towel on the floor. His daughter, Amelia Green, was due home from her summer shift at the animal clinic in a few hours, and she'd know what to do. But for now, Walter moved by instinct, fetching a shallow dish of water, a bit of chicken broth, a wet cloth to wipe the dirt from their coats. He looked at the pups again. They were both too thin, their ribs visible even beneath their fur. The male had perked up slightly, sniffing the broth, while the female still refused to lift her head. Walter knelt down and ran a hand gently along her side, feeling every bone. "You need a name, don't you?" he murmured. He studied her, noting the way her ears twitched, how her eyes flicked toward him, but didn't hold his gaze. There was something ancient in that look, quiet and watchful. "Nira," he said, trying the name out loud. "You look like a Nira." The male barked hoarsely at the sound. Walter turned to him, raising an eyebrow. And you, troublemaker, you'll be Kale. Nira and Kale. Names that sounded like they belonged to something more than this moment. As if by giving them those names, Walter could rewrite what had been done to them, make it matter less. He sat beside them on the cool kitchen tile, his back against the cabinets. The house creaked softly and the fan clicked above. Outside, the sun continued to bake the earth, but inside, two bruised little lives had found the first kindness in days, or maybe ever. Walter exhaled slowly, the weight of something unspoken heavy in his chest. He looked down at Kale and Nira and whispered, "We'll get you through this, both of you." And in that quiet space between breath and promise, something shifted. Not loudly, but deeply. He didn't know it yet, but rescuing those pups wouldn't just save them. It would unravel wounds far older than theirs and begin to stitch together something long thought broken. The morning sun filtered through the old farmhouse windows, casting golden bars of light across the wooden floor. The scent of brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of soil and wet dog. Amelia Green, 22, moved quietly through the kitchen, barefoot, hair pulled into a messy bun, her eyes still heavy with exhaustion. She had returned home barely 3 hours ago after a double shift, first at the animal clinic, then a late-night waitressing job at a roadside diner that smelled of burnt grease and desperation. Still in her faded scrubs, a small paw print logo embroidered over her heart, she knelt beside the 2 German Shepherd puppies curled on a blanket near the back door. Kale and Nira, now a day removed from being tied up in the sun, were still fragile, but their breathing had steadied. Nira, the smaller of the 2, had darker eyes, ones that held a haunting caution beyond her age. Her fur, soft but disheveled, was more sable than Kale's, with darker tones running down her spine. She was the quieter of the pair, less trusting, always half hiding behind her brother. Kale, bolder, already tried to stand, his oversized paws clumsy beneath his frame. His tan and black coat had begun to shine under Amelia's careful grooming, and his ears now perked slightly when she spoke. Amelia stroked Nira's back gently, whispering, "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you again." Her voice was soft, but carried that firm, compassionate tone particular to people who'd learned how to calm frightened animals, and sometimes themselves. Amelia stood about 5'6", with a slender, athletic build shaped by years of lifting crates, restraining nervous dogs, and pushing herself harder than anyone expected. Her skin was fair, lightly freckled across her cheeks, with warm hazel eyes that often looked tired but never dull. She had her father's square jaw, but none of his stillness. She was always moving, always worrying, always trying to hold things together. The puppies stirred slightly, then settled again. She tiptoed to the table, where a stack of bills lay half-covered beneath a veterinary textbook and a crumpled apron. Tuition, rent, clinic fees. She had done the math 3 times. Even with both jobs and a small scholarship, she was short nearly $2,000 for the final semester. It felt like a brick in her chest every time she thought about it. Her father, Walter, still asleep in the next room, didn't know. She couldn't bring herself to tell him. He had already sacrificed too much, taking landscaping jobs in the winter, refusing new boots for years, selling the last rifle from his youth. Telling him now would be like asking him to cut off another piece of himself. Her phone buzzed, a message from her boss at the diner. "We're short tonight, can you cover?" Amelia stared at it. Her shift at the clinic didn't end until 6. She'd get a 2-hour break at best. But saying no meant less money, and less money meant no degree. She sighed and typed, "I'll be there." She reached for her notebook and began listing supplies they still needed for Kale and Nira. High-calorie formula, puppy-safe dewormer, antibiotic cream. Her paycheck from the diner might cover half. She'd figure out the rest. She always did. She glanced at the fridge, where a worn photo was pinned with a ladybug magnet. Herself at age 10, holding a tiny beagle named Baxter in her arms, smiling up at her mother, Sarah Green. Sarah had been tall and graceful, with an effortless kindness. She wore long skirts and chamomile perfume, and had taught Amelia how to speak softly to wounded creatures. Her death had shattered the rhythm of their home, and while Walter had become quieter, Amelia had done the opposite, talking more, doing more, filling the silence with motion. Outside, the sun rose higher. Walter soon emerged from the hallway, his hair still damp from a quick rinse, a t-shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. He offered Amelia a nod, then looked down at the puppies. "They sleep better near you," he murmured. "They're starting to trust," she said, smiling faintly. He poured coffee and sat across from her. For a moment, the kitchen was quiet but warm, an invisible string pulling father and daughter close. Walter glanced at the stack of books on the table. "How's your last semester looking?" Amelia paused. She knew the question wasn't casual. Walter was no fool. He'd seen her worn shoes, the late-night returns, the second-hand lab coat she kept sewing back together. She forced a smile. "Almost there, just juggling things." He didn't press, just nodded slowly. "Well, you let me know if there's something I can do." She nodded back, hiding the lump in her throat. Later that evening, after her shift at the clinic and a quick drive down the gravel road to the diner, Amelia stood behind the counter, hair tied back, apron smudged with ketchup. She moved through the motions: pour coffee, take orders, clean booths, her thoughts always drifting back to the pups. She worried Nira wasn't eating enough. She worried Kale's leg was still too weak. But mostly, she worried time was running out, on her semester, her dream, her ability to keep pretending she was fine. At 2 a.m., she returned home. The porch light flickered softly, and the sound of crickets welcomed her back. Inside, Kale and Nira stirred at her presence. Amelia knelt down and whispered to them again, her voice cracked from exhaustion, but still full of love. "We're going to be okay," she told them. But even as she said it, she didn't know if it was true. In the quiet house, under the spinning fan and the weight of unspoken things, Amelia lay down on the couch with a blanket pulled over her and a textbook open across her chest. Kale curled up beside her. Nira, slower to trust, nestled near her feet. And though the night offered no answers, there was, in that moment, a fragile peace. But now, let us ask you something we'll answer before the story ends. Why do you think someone would tie up 2 German Shepherd puppies and leave them to suffer in the heat? 1. Because they were simply unwanted, another case of careless abandonment. 2. Because someone wanted to punish the boy who loved them. 3. Because getting rid of the dogs was part of something even more personal, and much darker. Comment below with your answer, 1, 2, or 3. By the end, the truth may not be what you expect. Noah Langston sat near the window of the second-story apartment he shared with his mother, his fingers pressed softly against the glass. The late summer sun filtered through, painting golden rectangles on the carpet. Outside, wind stirred the treetops and carried with it a stillness that felt unusually heavy. It had been only a day and a half since he last saw Buddy and Socks, but for Noah, time had slowed into something cruel and thick, like syrup that refused to move. He was 9, small for his age, with sandy brown hair that curled behind his ears and gray-blue eyes that held too much quiet. His legs, thin and unmoving, rested on the footrests of his worn black wheelchair. The accident that had taken his mobility at age 3 left no scars visible, but the wheelchair itself was its own kind of mark, always there, always reminding others that he was different. Noah rarely minded being in the chair, not really. What he hated was the way people looked at him, like he was glass, or worse, like he was invisible. That's why Buddy and Socks had meant so much. The 2 German Shepherd puppies had been a surprise gift from his mom for his birthday only a few weeks ago. Buddy had a tan face and eager paws that seemed too big for his body. Socks had darker fur and little white feet that gave him his name. They never judged, never hesitated. They followed Noah everywhere. When he rolled to the kitchen, they were on his heels. When he read on the couch, they curled beneath him. When he cried, they licked his cheeks and leaned their bodies into his legs like they knew exactly what he needed. And now they were gone. Noah had stayed late at school 2 days ago for speech therapy. When he returned, the backyard gate had been left wide open. The leashes were missing. Buddy and Socks were nowhere in sight. Emily, his mother, had called the shelters. She drove around for hours that night, circling the neighborhood with the windows down, calling their names, but nothing. Noah didn't speak much that night. He just stared at the empty space near his bed where the pups used to sleep. Emily Langston, 37, had the lean build of someone who worked hard and slept little. She wore her long dark hair in a braid and often had smudges of detergent or bleach on her forearms from her shifts at the local laundromat. Her voice was straightforward, her laugh rare but sincere. Life had made her tough, but around Noah she softened. She had raised him alone after her husband walked out years ago. Now, she juggled long hours and short money, doing everything she could to make life feel just a little bit normal. She walked in that afternoon with a brown bag in one hand and tiredness in every step. "They gave out leftover cookies at the counter," she said, placing the bag on the kitchen table. "Snickerdoodle, still warm." Noah didn't respond. Emily crouched beside him. "Any change?" He shook his head, eyes still on the window. "They're not coming back." "We don't know that," she said gently. He turned toward her, face pale and still. "I think someone took them. Someone who knew they were mine." Emily's jaw tightened. She didn't want to believe it, but deep down, she did. Noah rolled away from her and toward his desk. There, on the wall, were two pictures. One of him laughing as Buddy tugged his sleeve, the other of Socks curled up between the wheels of his chair. He stared at them as if he could will the dogs back into being. From a drawer, he pulled out his journal. It had a cracked blue cover and several pages already filled with drawings of dogs, notes, and clumsy letters to people who would never read them. He flipped to a new page and began to write. "It hasn't even been 2 days, but it feels like forever. I keep thinking maybe they'll walk through the door, like it's just a dream I'm stuck in. I called them today, quietly, just in case they could hear me, but they didn't come. If someone took them, I hope they at least didn't hurt them. And if someone finds them, maybe they'll give them new names. That's okay. If I ever see them again, and they don't answer to Buddy and Socks, I'll learn their new names. I'll call them what they know. I'll call them by the names that saved them." He stopped writing and closed the journal. Outside, a single dog barked in the distance. He strained to hear more. Silence. Somewhere deep down, something tugged inside him. A thread of feeling he didn't want to name. It wasn't hope. It was too soon for hope. But it was something. Back in the kitchen, Emily was unpacking laundry soap from a grocery bag. Her hands moved quickly, methodically, but her eyes kept flicking toward the hallway where Noah had gone. She hadn't told him what the officer had said on the phone that morning, how they suspected it might be kids, maybe a prank. She didn't want to believe that either. In his room, Noah stared out the window again. He whispered 2 names softly. Buddy, Socks. The words caught in his throat like a memory too fresh to touch. But he knew something now. If they ever came back to him, and they had been given new names, if someone out there had shown them kindness, protected them, given them a second chance, then maybe those names were part of the story too. Maybe he'd still call them Kale and Nira, not because he'd forgotten who they were, but because he finally understood what it meant to be found. The town park was unusually quiet for a Saturday afternoon. The playground swings creaked gently in the breeze, the only real sound aside from a pair of mourning doves fluttering near the wooden gazebo. Sunlight streamed through tall sycamore trees, pooling in golden puddles on the grass, and the smell of cut clover filled the warm air. At the far edge of the park, a large oak stood alone, its limbs heavy with leaves, its roots lifting slightly above the earth, like arms mid-embrace. Amelia Green walked slowly along the paved path that circled the park, her steps measured and eyes alert. She held a dual leash in one hand, her grip loose but steady, and beside her trotted 2 small German Shepherd puppies, one slightly ahead, the other lagging behind with cautious steps. Their coats gleamed after a week of nourishment and baths. Kale, the more adventurous of the 2, walked with ears perked and eyes scanning every motion in the distance, while Nira stuck close to Amelia's ankle, her posture low but curious, tail flicking anxiously every few steps. Amelia wore jeans and a navy t-shirt from the animal clinic where she worked. Her long hair, the color of late autumn wheat, was tied into a messy braid that swung behind her as she walked. A canvas tote slung across her shoulder held a collapsible water bowl, wet wipes, and a small vet kit. She never went anywhere without it. Her eyes, though young and bright, carried fatigue beneath their surface, like someone used to keeping her pain on mute. "Easy, Kale," she murmured as the larger puppy tugged toward a bush. "We're not chasing squirrels today." She guided them gently toward the oak tree, choosing a shady spot near the base to rest. Kale sat with a proud little huff, tongue out, while Nira curled into a patch of cool grass with her ears half folded back. Amelia pulled a book from her tote but didn't open it right away. Instead, her gaze wandered across the park, quietly observing the lives moving around her. That's when she saw them. A boy in a wheelchair and a woman in a pale blue button-up shirt were making their way slowly along the edge of the paved path. The boy looked no older than 9. His thin frame sat upright in a well-used chair with scuffed wheels and duct tape near the base. His hair was neatly brushed, and he wore a plain white t-shirt and jeans that covered his legs all the way to his shoes, despite the heat. His eyes, gray-blue and wide, kept glancing around the park like he was looking for something he wasn't sure he'd find. Amelia's breath caught. Emily Langston, the boy's mother, walked beside him. She was tall and wiry, her long dark braid over one shoulder and a woven grocery bag slung over the other. Her features were striking, in a quiet way. Sharp cheekbones, full lips, and eyes that didn't hide anything. There was a strength to her posture, the kind earned from years of carrying burdens no one else saw. Amelia didn't know them personally, but she'd heard their names around town, especially the boys. Noah Langston, the boy who'd lost his dogs, the boy who'd written letters to the school about the ramp, the boy who never complained. Cale suddenly perked up, ears forward, his body still. Nira lifted her head as well, her tail curling around her body, nose twitching. Before Amelia could react, the 2 puppies began moving. Not running, not charging, just walking. Slowly, deliberately, they moved across the grass, straight toward Noah's wheelchair. Noah froze. Emily reached instinctively for his arm, but he shook his head slightly, eyes locked on the approaching pups. Cale stopped about a foot away and sat down, head tilted. Nira crept even closer, then lowered her chest to the ground, paws outstretched, eyes rising to meet Noah's. There was a stillness in the moment. Not silence, exactly, but the kind of hush that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. Noah looked at them for a long time, his lips parted. "Buddy?" he whispered, his voice cracked, then again softer than any voice in that park could hear, but enough that both dogs reacted. "Socks?" Cale gave a soft whine. Nira blinked and crept forward until her nose touched the edge of Noah's shoe. Noah's chest trembled. His hands hovered over the wheels of his chair, not knowing what to do. His eyes brimmed with tears. Emily crouched beside him, her hand on his back. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "They remember," he said. And then he cried. Not the loud kind, not the tantrum kind, but the kind that happens when you've held something in too long. The kind that comes from the heart, breaking just enough to let the light in. Amelia approached slowly, her heart pounding. She knelt in the grass near them, speaking gently. "You know them?" Noah nodded without looking at her. "They're mine. I lost them. I found them 2 mornings ago," she said softly. "They were tied to a tree outside of town. Someone left them there." Emily's jaw clenched. "Of course they did." Amelia looked at Noah, her voice careful. "I didn't know their real names. I called them Cale and Nira." Noah wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. He looked down at the 2 puppies, both now leaning into his chair, Cale licking the edge of his hand. "They're good names," Noah whispered. If that's what they answer to now, I want to keep calling them that, because you saved them, and that matters." Amelia didn't respond at first. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She nodded, just once. "I think they'd like that too." From a distance, near the gazebo, Walter Green stood with his arms folded, watching. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He had only come to bring Amelia her forgotten water bottle, but when he saw what was happening beneath the oak tree, he stayed back. Something about the scene stopped him cold. For a moment, Walter wasn't standing in the park. He was back in a hospital room, years ago, holding the hand of a woman too tired to lift her head. Sarah, his late wife, had been tall and soft-voiced, a quiet artist who painted birds and wildflowers on the backs of receipts and napkins. Cancer had taken her slow, leaving behind that haunted, beautiful look in her eyes, a look he saw now mirrored in that boy's. Back then, Sarah had whispered something into Walter's ear just before she passed. "Everything connects, Walt. You just have to look gently enough." As he watched the boy and the puppies and his daughter kneeling in the grass, Walter finally understood. None of this had been chance. The Monday after the reunion in the park, Millersfield Elementary returned to its usual rhythm, children filing in through the front steps, teachers herding sleepy students with coffee in hand, and the hum of fluorescent lights flickering to life in every classroom. But For Derek Foster, today felt different. His stomach had been in knots since Sunday night, when he finally handed over the letter to his mother and said, "I need to give this to someone." Derek was 9, just like Noah, but slightly taller and stockier, with a mop of ginger hair that refused to stay combed and a pale face speckled with freckles. His eyes, green and usually darting around the room with mischief, were now dull and fixed on the tiled floor as he walked toward the counselor's office. His sneakers squeaked slightly, and he flinched with each sound. A week ago, he wouldn't have cared. He'd have laughed with the boys who called Noah Rusty Wheels, or made jokes about his dog army. He might have even started it. But after what happened, after seeing Kale and Naira run to Noah like they belonged there, after hearing from one of the older boys that they'd actually been left tied to a tree, something shifted in Derek. It hadn't felt like a joke anymore. It had felt like cruelty. He clutched the envelope tighter. It was crumpled now, folded and unfolded a dozen times, the ink slightly smudged from the sweat of his palms. Inside was a letter he'd written himself. No help from his mom, no edits from his teacher. He knocked on the door. Inside, Miss Harding, the school counselor, looked up from her desk. She was in her mid-40s, short and round, with thick glasses and a warm voice that always sounded like she was about to start reading a bedtime story. She wore a floral cardigan, a constant fixture in her wardrobe, and a necklace made of polished wooden beads that clacked softly as she moved. "Derek," she said kindly, "come in. I wanted to give you something," he mumbled, handing over the letter. She took it, eyebrows raised slightly, and gestured for him to sit. He didn't. He stood there, shifting from foot to foot, watching her eyes scan the words he had rewritten 3 times before getting them right. "Noah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I thought it would be funny and the others dared me, but it wasn't. We used to be friends. I don't know why I started being mean. I think I was mad that people liked you more. I was mad that teachers helped you and not me. That was wrong. I know what happened to your dogs. I didn't mean for them to get hurt. I didn't know someone would leave them. I'll say sorry to you in person. I should. I miss being your friend. Derek." Miss Harding looked up, her expression unreadable. "Would you like to give this to Noah yourself?" Derek hesitated, then nodded. "If he wants to see me." That afternoon, Miss Harding made the call. Emily Langston answered, and after a long pause said simply, "If my son's okay with it, then I am too." The meeting was set for Tuesday, after school, in the counselor's room. Amelia offered to bring Kale and Naira, unsure if it was the right time, but Noah insisted. "If they're there," he said, "it won't feel so scary." Noah sat in his chair near the window, Kale lying beside his wheel, and Naira curled beneath the table. His hands fidgeted with a Velcro strap on his backpack. He wore a blue button-down shirt that Emily had ironed carefully that morning, and his hair had been brushed straight back, making him look older than 9. The door opened. Derek stepped in, clutching the same letter in his hand. His eyes met Noah's only briefly before dropping again. Kale lifted his head but didn't bark. Naira blinked once, then rested her chin back on her paws. Derek took a deep breath. "Hey." Noah nodded. "Hi." Miss Harding gently left the room. Emily waited just outside, pretending to scroll her phone. Derek stepped closer and held out the letter. "I wanted to give you this myself." Noah took it slowly, unfolded it again even though he'd already read a scanned copy. He didn't say anything for a long time. "You tied them up?" he asked quietly. Derek shook his head fast. "No, I swear, we let them out the gate. We thought they'd come back. Then one of the older guys said we should scare you, make you think they ran away. It was dumb. I didn't know they were gonna get hurt." Noah stared at him. "Why would you want to scare me?" "I don't know," Derek whispered. "Because you got help. Because people liked you. I thought if I made fun of you, they'd like me too." Noah blinked. "That's really dumb." Derek gave a weak smile. "Yeah, I know." They were quiet again. Then Noah looked down at Kale. "They're okay now. Someone found them, saved them, gave them new names." "I like the names," Derek said. "So do I." Derek took a breath. "Do you think maybe we could be friends again someday?" Noah didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. Derek stared at it like it was a question he'd been waiting years to answer. He stepped forward and shook it. It wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches, no hugs, but something softened in both their faces. A tiny crack in the wall they'd built between them. Outside the room, Emily wiped a tear she pretended wasn't there. Ms. Harding offered her a small smile. "Sometimes," she said, "kids surprise us in the best ways." When they came out together, Noah and Derek were side by side, not laughing, not pretending the past hadn't happened, but walking towards something new. That night, Noah opened his journal. "I forgave Derek today, not because what he did was okay, but because I think if I didn't, I'd stay angry forever. And I don't want to be angry. Not when I have Kale and Naira. Not when I still have the chance to be the kind of friend I wish I'd had." He closed the book and looked down at the puppies curled beside his bed. "We're gonna be okay," he whispered, and this time he believed it. The morning mail arrived late as usual. Walter Green stepped out onto his porch with a mug of black coffee and a sigh, nodding politely to the mail carrier, a young man with earbuds and a constant apologetic smile. The envelope bundle was thin, mostly junk, an ad for lawnmower blades, a coupon for tires, a late reminder about property tax, but one letter stood out. It was cream-colored, heavier than the rest, and addressed in tight, formal handwriting. To Miss Amelia Green, C.O. Mr. Walter Green, Millersfield, Ohio, no return address. Just a small embossed insignia in the bottom corner of the envelope, 2 interlocking circles, almost like a medical logo. Walter furrowed his brow and turned the envelope in his hands before walking back inside. Amelia wasn't home. She'd taken Kale and Naira for their follow-up appointment at the clinic and had promised to be back before lunch. Walter set the letter on the kitchen table, but something about it itched at the back of his neck. He poured another cup of coffee, then sat down, the chair creaking beneath him. The air in the house felt still, heavy. After a few moments, he stood again and peeled the envelope open along its edge with a butter knife. Inside was a single sheet of ivory paper, folded neatly. At the top, printed in simple gray font, Julian Langston, founder and CEO, VitaSurg Medical Systems. Walter read the letter twice, then a third time, the words sinking in slowly, like stones into water. "To Amelia Green, I hope this message finds you well. I write to you with a request, one that carries great personal weight. My name is Julian Langston. I am the biological father of a boy named Noah, who I believe is in your care or in contact with your family. Years ago, after my son's accident, I made a terrible mistake. I left. There is no excuse for that choice, but in the years since, I've built something that now allows me to offer help, real, meaningful help, not only to Noah, but to those who've cared for him. I would like to speak with him, gently, respectfully, through someone he trusts. I'm told your family is kind, careful, and that you are a veterinary student who understands compassion at its deepest level. Enclosed is my business card. I hope you will consider this. Julian Langston." Walter let out a long breath and sat down again, this time heavier. The name Langston stirred a faint memory. Years ago, during the first weeks of Amelia's vet school, Emily had come by with her little boy for help with an injured bird. That was the first time he had seen Noah. He remembered the child's wide eyes, his wary stillness. He hadn't asked about the missing father then. Nobody had. In small towns, certain silences were left alone, but now that silence had come knocking again, with a name and a business card that Walter now held in his calloused hands. It was black with silver trim, embossed in minimalist font. A personal cell number, a Manhattan office address, and the phrase, "Innovation with Compassion." Amelia returned an hour later, windblown and red-cheeked from the walk. Kale and Naira padded inside ahead of her, wagging their tails. She dropped her bag and unhooked the leashes. "They're both doing great," she said breathlessly. Kale gained 2 pounds. Naira barked for the first time at a pigeon. It terrified her. Walter smiled, then gestured to the table. "There's a letter for you. Came this morning." Amelia glanced at it, picked it up, scanned the contents. Her expression shifted slowly, from curiosity to surprise to a quiet alarm. She reread the name. "Julian Langston," she said aloud. "You know who he is?" She nodded. "He's Noah's father. Emily mentioned him once. She never said much, only that he left after the accident, and she didn't want Noah growing up chasing ghosts." Walter folded his hands. "He's not just anybody now. He's a billionaire, medical tech, probably richer than the state of Ohio." Amelia said nothing. Walter leaned forward. You think Emily should know? Amelia hesitated. If it were me, I'd want to know, even if I didn't want to hear it. That evening, after some hesitation, Walter called Emily and asked if they could talk. Emily arrived just after sunset, wearing her work uniform under a jean jacket, her braids slightly frayed at the edges. Her face was calm, but her eyes were wary. She didn't like surprises. Walter poured her tea, then handed her the letter. She read it in silence, jaw tightening with every line. When she finally looked up, her voice was even, but low. He wants to see Noah. He says he wants to talk. Through someone Noah trusts. He didn't say when or where. Emily stared at the letter. Her hands, always so strong, trembled just slightly. I haven't said his name out loud in 5 years, she said. Not once. Not even when Noah asked where he was. Walter's tone softened. Does he ask often? Not out loud, she murmured. But I found his journal open one morning last week. A page I hadn't seen. He wrote, I wonder if Dad would have liked Buddy in socks. The room went quiet. Emily looked down at the card again. He left us, she whispered. He left when our son was broken and scared, and I had nothing. Nothing but a toddler in a chair and a paycheck that barely covered dinner. I know. I don't care how rich he is. I don't care if he's king of the moon. You don't just walk back in because it's convenient. Walter didn't answer right away. Then he said, but if Noah wants to know, if he wants to see him, will you let him? Emily wiped the corner of her eye and exhaled. I don't know, but I'll think about it. That night, back in their apartment, Emily sat on Noah's bed as he fell asleep. Neera tucked under one arm, Kale sprawled at the footboard. His journal sat nearby, open. She reached for it, then paused. She didn't want to invade, but the page was already half turned. She read, I don't remember his voice. I don't remember his face. But sometimes I imagine he would have called me champ. I imagine he would have laughed if Kale tackled him. Maybe he would have built a ramp to the treehouse. Maybe he would have stayed. Emily closed the journal gently, her throat thick with emotion. She leaned over and kissed Noah's forehead. He stirred, but didn't wake. She whispered, maybe it's time. Julian Langston had stood in front of many doors in his life. Corporate glass doors etched with his name, press rooms filled with reporters, hospital wings bearing the logos of devices he'd helped design. But none had ever made his hands sweat quite like the white wooden gate outside the modest 2-bedroom rental where his son lived. It was late afternoon, and the light was beginning to soften over the rooftops of Millersfield. The trees along the street stood tall, their branches lightly rustling in the breeze. Julian stood frozen on the sidewalk, one hand on the wrought iron fence, the other holding nothing but the weight of everything he'd never said. He looked nothing like the man who had disappeared 9 years earlier. Julian, now 45, wore a tailored gray sport coat over a dark sweater, clean-shaven, salt just beginning to dust his temples. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of careful control, his posture upright, his jaw tight, as though he were holding in breath and memory at the same time. His eyes, once bright with ambition, now moved slowly, cautiously, as if searching for permission to be here. Across the small lawn, the front door remained closed. He had not called ahead. He had only written one letter, and now he was simply here. The sound of dogs barking in the distance pulled his gaze to the left. From the side yard, 2 figures appeared. The larger one walked with confident bounding steps. Kale, his tan and black coat catching the light. Behind him, quieter but purposeful, came Neera, her ears perked, head tilted slightly. Julian took a step back, uncertain. But the dogs didn't bark. They didn't growl. They didn't rush. Instead, they walked forward, almost as if they recognized something invisible. They came to a stop between Julian and the front steps of the house. Julian stared at them, his throat dry. Hey, he whispered, his voice caught between awe and fear. Kale looked at him, really looked, his amber eyes sharp and alert. Neera sat down gently beside her brother, eyes shifting between Julian and the door behind them. There was something almost ceremonial in the moment, as though they were deciding who would be let through, who would be forgiven. The door opened. Noah appeared first, wheeling slowly down the ramp his mother had built herself last year. He was dressed in a navy hoodie and jeans, a little taller than Julian had imagined from the pictures he had seen online. Behind him stood Emily, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Noah didn't speak. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. His hand twitched, but he didn't raise it. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the wind brushing the trees. Then Noah looked down at Kale and Naira. Both dogs had turned to face him now, still seated, as if awaiting his signal. Noah looked back up at Julian. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, but he didn't turn away either. And that was enough. Emily stepped forward and spoke first. "You drove all the way here just to stand outside?" Julian cleared his throat. "I didn't want to push. I didn't know if—" "No," she interrupted gently. "You don't get to lead this conversation. Not yet." He nodded. "Understood." Kale stood and stretched. Naira let out a small huff, then trotted over and rested her head on Noah's knee. Julian watched them silently. "They're amazing," he said. "They survived," Emily replied, "like we did." Noah wheeled forward just an inch. "Why now?" he asked. Julian met his son's eyes. "Because for years, I thought I didn't deserve to be a father. And maybe I still don't. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't try." Noah looked at him for a long time. "I don't know what I want from you," he said. Julian nodded. "That's okay. I'm not here to take anything. Just to be nearby, if that's allowed." Emily studied his face for a moment. Then she exhaled. "We're not ready for coffee, but if you want to sit out here, they'll keep an eye on you." She motioned to the dogs. Julian gave the smallest smile he had in years. "Fair enough." That evening, as the sky darkened and the porch light flicked on, Julian sat on the curb across the street, parked just behind a large maple tree that partially obscured the front yard. His car, a sleek black sedan, sat idle, and inside it, the leather seats held a duffel bag and the same coat he'd worn earlier, now crumpled from being thrown in frustration. He hadn't booked a hotel. He hadn't called a driver. He'd come to stay, to wait, however long it took. But sleep was elusive, so Julian reclined the seat slightly and looked up at the stars. It was near midnight when he heard footsteps on gravel and the creak of a wooden gate. A figure approached quietly. Walter Green, wearing a flannel shirt, dark jeans, and carrying a worn thermos, walked across the lawn and stopped beside the car. Julian sat up slowly. "I figured you might be out here," Walter said, handing him the thermos. Julian took it carefully. "Thank you." Walter leaned against the hood. "You know, I've seen a lot of men come and go in my life. The ones who stay rarely say the right thing, but they show up anyway." Julian looked down. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Good," Walter replied. "Means you're thinking. Means you care." There was a pause. "Can I ask you something?" Julian said. "Sure." "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" Walter took a long sip from his own thermos before answering. "Forgiveness isn't a door you knock on. It's a room someone has to build. You just sit outside until they open it." Julian exhaled, the words sinking in. Walter continued. "You want to do something for that boy? Start by shutting up. Don't defend yourself. Don't explain. Just listen. The truth is, sometimes the only way to start making things right is to say nothing at all." Julian stared out at the quiet house. In the window, Kale's silhouette stood tall and alert. Naira's tail flicked once in the shadows, and somewhere behind them, a boy slept with both dogs at his feet. Julian Langston wasn't a man easily shaken, but something had changed since his night on the curb outside Emily's house. He had slept only in fragments, the streetlight flickering through the windshield, and Walter's words echoing in his ears. When morning finally broke, he didn't drive back to the airport. Instead, he drove to the quiet side of town, where a modest red brick building stood tucked between a shuttered post office and a family-owned bakery. The sign out front read, "Millersfield Veterinary Clinic." He pulled into the small lot and sat for a moment. His eyes trailed over the cracked sidewalk, the faded blue paint of the handicap ramp, and the old oak tree that shaded the left side of the building. The clinic wasn't failing, but it was clearly tired. Tired like the town it served. Tired like the woman who had raised his son without help. Inside, Amelia Green stood bent over a husky mix with a torn paw pad. Her hair was tied into a tight ponytail, sweat glistening on her forehead beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. She wore a faded pair of scrubs and a look of sharp focus. Her hands, gentle yet efficient, wrapped the paw while whispering to the anxious dog in a rhythm only animals understood. Amelia was 24, tall and lithe, with expressive green eyes and a soft voice that often hid her exhaustion. She was weeks away from finishing her veterinary degree, a dream she'd fought for tooth and nail. But no one, not even Walter, knew how close that dream had come to ending. Across the room, a girl in a sunflower yellow hoodie organized medical supplies. She moved with care, but every few minutes she paused to cough into her elbow. Her name was Leah Tron, Amelia's best friend, and one of the only other women in the program who understood the balancing act of ambition and hardship. Leah, 23, was short and strong-framed with dark brown eyes and a bob haircut that framed her round face. She came from a family of immigrants and had nearly dropped out the semester before when her father, a local mechanic, was diagnosed with late-stage liver disease. Their savings had evaporated into hospital bills. She never complained. She just worked double shifts at the diner and borrowed textbooks instead of buying them. Julian stepped into the clinic and cleared his throat. Amelia looked up, surprised but composed. "Mr. Langston?" "I hope it's not inappropriate," he said quietly. I heard you worked here." Amelia offered a polite nod. "We're open for emergencies today. Nothing fancy. What can I help you with?" "I don't need anything," he said, "but I think I can help you." She set the husky gently into a recovery crate, then walked over, arms crossed. "How so?" "I know about the tuition, about how close you are to having to pause everything you've worked for." Amelia's expression froze. Julian continued, "I didn't dig for it. I overheard someone at the clinic in town mention that the state scholarship didn't renew. And I know how much student debt weighs on you because I spent 10 years of my life designing systems that profit off it. I've seen what it does." Amelia said nothing. He pulled a slim folder from his coat pocket and placed it gently on the counter. "This is a full sponsorship for the remainder of your program. Not a loan, not a contract, just help." "I don't," she began. He raised a hand gently. "It's not pity, it's gratitude. You saved my son's dogs, and in a way, you saved my chance to be near him again." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "But that's not all," Julian added. "This clinic, it deserves better. This town does too. I'd like to expand it, renovate the building, increase capacity, and turn it into a community-based veterinary support center focused on rescue animals, free care for low-income families, and local education. I want you to run it." Amelia's jaw fell slightly. "Run it? I'll hire a full staff, but the vision, that's yours. I've read your research proposals. I've seen the way you train Kale and Naira. You don't just treat animals, you understand the bond people form with them. That's rare." Amelia felt the sting of tears at the back of her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," Julian said. "Talk to your dad. Talk to Leah." He turned to the girl by the shelves. "You're Leah Tran?" She looked up, startled. Yes?" He handed her a separate envelope. "There's a scholarship in there with your name on it. Full coverage for your final year, plus a small grant to help cover family medical bills." Leah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Her eyes widened, lips parted, but no words came. Amelia stepped toward Julian. "Why are you doing this for all of us?" He smiled softly. "Because I've spent a decade solving problems with money, and this is the first time it feels like more than just a transaction. It feels right." Later that evening, Amelia returned home and found Walter pruning tomatoes in the backyard. He looked up. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Something like that," she replied. She sat down on the porch steps and stared into the yard where Kale and Naira chased each other in wide, playful loops. The golden light of dusk settled gently across their coats. Walter wiped his hands and sat beside her. "He showed up, didn't he?" She nodded. "He wants to fund the clinic, make it bigger, make it matter." "And you?" "I think I want that too," Walter smiled. "Then don't look back." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You always say that." "I always mean it." In the distance, Kale barked once. Naira raced after a moth, her movements clumsy and full of joy. Inside her room, Leah stared at the scholarship letter, still in disbelief. And in a hotel room at the edge of town, Julian sat at a desk, staring at a blank journal. He had started it for Noah, but hadn't yet found the right words. Tonight, though, he wrote, "Sometimes healing doesn't begin with an apology. Sometimes it begins when we choose to build something better. Something that says, I remember you. I believe in you. and I never stopped hoping you'd find your way. The sky over Millersfield High School was a canvas of soft pastels as families, students, and faculty gathered in the courtyard for the graduation ceremony. Folding chairs formed long, imperfect rows on the grass, the scent of fresh-cut clover rising with the breeze. The old gymnasium banner had been dusted off and draped across a modest wooden stage, and beneath it stood the graduating class, dressed in navy caps and gowns, their faces glowing with equal parts pride and disbelief. Among them stood Amelia Green, the tassel of her cap catching in the wind. Her face was serene but flushed, her green eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Walter and Leah in the front row, both beaming. Beside Walter sat Noah, who looked almost like a different boy now, his shoulders straighter, his smile easier. His wheelchair had been freshly polished, and a small bow tie peeked out beneath the collar of his crisp white shirt. Nestled calmly at his feet were Cale and Naira, each wearing a tiny bandana embroidered with Amelia's initials. Somewhere toward the back, blending into the crowd, stood Julian Langston. He wore no suit today, only a charcoal pullover and slacks, his hair tousled slightly by the breeze. He hadn't asked to be acknowledged. He hadn't asked for a seat. He just came to watch. The principal, a short, round woman named Mrs. Arnett, adjusted the microphone with a squeak and smiled warmly at the crowd. Before we present our final diploma today, we have a surprise. One of our younger students has asked to say a few words in honor of someone very special. Murmurs moved through the crowd as Mrs. Arnett stepped aside and Noah wheeled forward. He was smaller than the podium, but Walter had already arranged a microphone stand that curved gently toward him. Noah took a shaky breath, and then, in a voice still soft but clear, he spoke. "My name is Noah Langston. Some of you know me as the kid with the dogs. Some of you knew me before that, just as the kid in the wheelchair. For a long time, that's all I felt like, a problem to work around. A name on a list that always came with a sigh." Silence fell, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind people offer when they're truly listening. "But then, two things happened," Noah continued. "One, I lost something, and two, someone helped me find it again." He looked down at Cale and Naira, who sat at attention, watching him as if they understood every word. "These two," he said, "they're not just dogs. They're not even just pets. They're bridges. Between fear and trust, between hurt and healing. Because of them, I met Amelia." He turned toward her, and Amelia blinked quickly, suddenly blinking back tears. "She didn't just help them," Noah said. "She helped me, without even knowing it. And today she graduates, but really, she's been showing us all how to stand tall long before today." He paused, took another breath. "So I just want to say, thank you. Thank you for not giving up. For showing me that broken things aren't lost forever. That sometimes, what seems like the end of something is really the start of something better." The crowd erupted in soft applause, mixed with sniffles and smiles. Amelia stepped down from the stage and hugged Noah tightly, Cale standing between them, tail wagging like a metronome of joy. At the edge of the crowd, Julian pressed a hand to his chest, his eyes shimmering. He didn't move forward, didn't try to interrupt. He simply stood there, letting the moment belong entirely to the people who had earned it. Later that afternoon, the courtyard slowly cleared, the banner folded back into storage, and diplomas tucked into frames. But on the far side of the schoolyard, beneath an old maple tree near the fence, Derek Foster and Noah sat with their legs crossed on the grass. Well, Noah sat in his chair, but Derek had sprawled out beside him, a clipboard balanced on his knee. The sun had begun its descent, casting long golden rays across the playground. "So," Derek said, chewing the end of his pen, "what do we call it?" Noah looked thoughtful. "Something that includes everyone, not just wheelchairs, not just pets, like a place where nobody feels like they're in the way." Derek nodded. "Inclusive pet and play garden? Sounds like a museum," Noah grinned. "What about the Buddy Field?" Derek paused, then laughed. "Because of your old dog name?" Noah nodded. "Because everyone deserves a buddy. Dogs, kids, everyone." Cale barked once in agreement. Nira yawned and rolled onto her back in the grass. They had been working for weeks, collecting student signatures, measuring out the unused grassy corner near the lunchroom, and writing a proposal to the school board. The design included sensory-friendly paths, wheelchair-accessible play zones, shaded benches for service animals, and interactive features like agility poles and scent puzzles. It wasn't just about recreation, it was about recognition. Mrs. Arnett had called it ambitious. Derek had called it a redemption arc. Noah had called it hope on purpose. As the two boys leaned over the clipboard again, revising the grant letter for the 10th time, Julian stood quietly from a distance, still holding his coffee from earlier. He didn't interrupt, didn't insert himself. But as he walked back toward the parking lot, he stopped beside the school's community bulletin board. He pinned a small envelope beneath the heading, Upcoming Projects. Inside the envelope was a note and a check, sizable enough to begin the first phase of construction. He signed only his initials, JL. That night, as the sky turned to a velvet twilight, Walter sat with Emily on the back porch, a rare glass of wine between them. Noah was inside, writing in his journal, Kale curled beneath his desk, Naira snoring softly under the window. "He did good," Emily said, referring to Noah's speech. "He did brave," Walter corrected. "Brave is always better than good." She looked at him. "You think Julian's really changed?" Walter took a slow sip, then nodded. "I think the boy changed him, and the dogs, and maybe the silence between all of it." Emily smiled, just slightly. In her heart, forgiveness hadn't arrived like a lightning bolt. It came gently, like the wind through an open window. Unexpected, but not unwelcome. And in the home behind them, a boy wrote with a heart no longer guarded. The Millersfield Community Veterinary Center opened its doors on a warm June morning, with the sun gilding every blade of grass in soft gold. The once humble brick clinic had been transformed. A freshly painted sign arched over the entrance. Flower beds lined the walkways, and a wide ramp gently curved toward the main door, inviting all feet, human and animal alike. Inside, the reception area hummed with quiet excitement. Children clutched leashes, elderly women with cats and carriers waited on cushioned benches, and a golden retriever wearing a service vest dozed peacefully beside a young boy with sensory headphones. The walls were painted soft greens and blues with illustrations of animals hand-drawn by local school children framed proudly along the hallway. Amelia Green, now Dr. Amelia Green, moved through the building with grace and certainty. Her long ponytail bounced lightly as she guided a nervous child toward the exam room, her voice calm and steady. Her white coat bore her name, but it was the warmth in her eyes that earned the trust of every visitor. Outside, in the shaded back garden behind the center, Walter Green stood beneath a lattice awning, tightening the final bolt on a wooden therapy ramp. He wore khaki work pants, a breathable navy shirt, and a wide-brimmed straw hat that had seen at least 10 Ohio summers. Sweat beaded along his forehead, but his movements were methodical. Around him, soft music played from a speaker tucked into the bushes, barely audible over the gentle gurgle of a stone water fountain nearby. This outdoor space had been Walter's domain from the beginning. While Amelia handled diagnostics and surgeries inside, Walter was given complete freedom to design a healing area for animals recovering from trauma and children learning to trust again. It was part playground, part sanctuary. And at its heart were two dogs. Kale and Naira, now nearly a year old, had grown into their names. Kale was tall, with a sleek black and tan coat and a proud, almost sentinel-like gait. Naira, slightly smaller, with a dark sable fur and soft brown eyes, moved like a shadow. Quiet, patient, always observing. Both had passed their therapy certifications with ease. Together, they had become the faces of a new initiative, Children's Canine Comfort Partners, a program that paired trained rescue dogs with children facing physical and emotional challenges. Walter watched them as they trotted through the grass, gently approaching a boy with crutches and offering a paw without a command. The boy laughed, really laughed, and Walter felt something stretch and settle inside his chest. It was late afternoon when the real moment arrived. Just beyond the therapy garden, across a narrow wooden path that had been built over the years, sat an old sycamore tree. Its bark bore the gentle scars of age, and its roots still lifted slightly from the soil, like arms that once carried pain. It was the same tree where Kale and Naira had once been tied, left to the sun, left to silence, left for no one. Now, it was surrounded by a circle of chairs. Noah, now 10, sat in his wheelchair beneath the tree, his hands gently resting on Nira's back. He had grown taller, his legs still thin, but his presence broader. His voice came easier these days, his laughter more frequent. The wheelchair was still a part of him, but not all of him. Beside him sat Emily, her hair tied back, her dress simple and floral, her hand resting on her son's shoulder. She looked at peace, tired always, but no longer hollow. She had learned how to breathe again. Next to her, Julian Langston sat quietly, dressed in jeans and a linen shirt. He had let his beard grow slightly, and his wrist bore a thin braided bracelet Noah had made weeks ago and handed to him without a word. He never took it off. On Amelia's side, Leah Tran stood in a sundress with a clipboard in hand, taking notes for a community outreach event, her scholarship certificate folded neatly in her purse. She beamed with every glance toward Amelia, now her mentor as well as friend. Walter joined them last, his straw hat in hand, wiping dirt from his palms. They all sat beneath the branches, the same ground once shadowed by cruelty, now wrapped in quiet joy. The roots that had once held pain now held stories of rescue, reunion, and redemption. Noah looked around the group, then at the two dogs sleeping peacefully beside his chair. "Do you think they remember?" he asked softly. Walter smiled. "Dogs don't forget kindness or fear, but they're better than us at deciding which one to carry." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook. "I wanted to share something," he said, his voice a little rough. Everyone turned to him. "I've been working with the town to set up a scholarship fund," he began, "something that could help young people pursue medicine, animal care, or community work, especially those who've lost someone or been left behind." He paused, his fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. "I've named it the Sarah Green Kindness Fund," he continued, his eyes meeting Walter's, "because I've learned that the people who do the most good are rarely the ones standing in the spotlight. They're the ones who hold broken things together quietly. Sarah seemed like that kind of person." Walter blinked hard, the wind brushing through his gray hair like an unseen hand. He nodded. She was. Silence fell, soft and sacred. Noah pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it up. "Can I read something too?" Amelia reached over and helped him steady it. Noah read, "This tree was once the end of the road for two puppies, but now it's where their story began. They didn't run away from what happened. They walked through it, with us, with love, with courage. And because of them, we're all a little braver too." He folded the paper. Julian reached over and squeezed his shoulder gently. Kale barked once, just as the breeze picked up again. As the sun dipped lower behind the fields, the family sat quietly beneath the tree, bound not by blood, but by something stronger, by choice, by kindness, by the belief that the past could be rewritten, not erased, but transformed. And just beyond them, the sign near the center's garden fluttered gently in the wind, the Buddy Field, for every step that found its way home. Sometimes, what begins in pain can still end in peace. Two puppies tied to a tree, a boy who had every reason to stop believing, a father who returned not with excuses, but with humility, and people who chose compassion over comfort. In the quiet moments, under an old tree, beside a therapy dog, inside a journal we don't show anyone, healing begins. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough to remind us no act of kindness is ever wasted. If you've ever loved, forgiven, or tried again after being hurt, you already know the truth behind this story. So, here's our prayer for you. May God bless you with gentle strength to face the hard days, eyes to see grace where the world sees weakness, and a heart that stays open, even when it has every reason to close. If this story touched something in you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every word, and your voice matters. And if you'd like to see more stories like this, full of heart, healing, and hope, subscribe to our channel. You never know who might need this story today. Amen.